Giuliani. I'm from the Cooper Union. And Cooper Union is particularly happy to partner up with the Van Allen Institute for these events. And for two reasons. One, because Cooper Union is a public space. It's a public space in a sense that it has one of the great institutions of the city, that is a great hall, that has been the theater for conversation, dialogue, polemics since the time of Abraham Lincoln all the way to recent times with speech by Obama and others. The second thing is that Cooper has always been, as an architectural school, interested to the city, and in particular to New York, and in particular to the idea of the public space as a civic space, a space that is not just simply the leftover from the building, but is a space that is occupied actively by our society, our people, the inhabitant of the city. And so in that we found interesting resonance with the work that Van Allen does, in particular, for example, this object here, but also with this idea of the conversation, the dialogue, the confrontation between different, or comparison rather, between different opinions about something that is urban as the infrastructure, that is something that maybe we don't look at as something that actually affect our life, but it is permanent and it's changing in terms of its nature under our eyes. I'm very happy to be here and to support this event. And thank you to Stephen for inviting me.
Welcome to Crossroads Conversations. Bill Millard for Van Allen. And let me make sure everybody got both your names. George?
I am George Bulow. I'm a businessman, native New Yorker, grew up in the suburbs, but have lived in Manhattan since 1971. Aside from being a businessman, I'm also kind of independent historian with a particular interest in transportation and infrastructure.
Terrific. And can you introduce yourself?
My name's Nadine. I'm a graduate student for sustainability science, and I just randomly visit New York.
Be closer to it.
Okay.
All right.
So, okay, sustainability science. Sounds like you've got some attention you're paying professionally to what we might call green infrastructure.
Yes.
One thing a lot of people may not recognize is that nature gives us a lot of infrastructure to start with.
Yes.
What does the word infrastructure make you think of? How do you define the term infrastructure? How is it important to you? And I want to ask you to be right on top of the mic here too, because we've got a lot of noise to cut over here.
Okay, so when I think of infrastructure, I just think of like how things are, just the bones of everything, how things are set up. So just to give layman's terms, it's just the bones of how things are put together. When I think of green infrastructure, it just seems like the most sustainable way to run an environment, a community. And when you think of that, you think of the bare bones of how to sustainably run a community without putting, the least impact, the least destruction to that community. And that's what's important to make sure we're ensuring, a lifestyle for the communities and generations behind us. I'm getting nervous.
Okay, thanks. George, would you like to field the same question? What do you think of when the term infrastructure comes up?
Well, it's essentially structure. It's physical structures that carry water, carry gas, carry electricity, transport people, convey telecommunications, etc. It doesn't have to be physical in the sense that microwaves also would be part of an infrastructure, but they require structural places to be able to work as a network.
Okay. Around the country, we often hear that the infrastructure is in terrible condition. I think the American Society of Civil Engineers, every year they give the United States a D+ grade. That's D as in dog, not B as in busy. D+ is how the engineers think we're doing. There are some areas for improvement. If you are, as you described yourself, a historian of infrastructure, how do you see things falling apart, and how do you see it possibly improving? What would you like to see improved?
New York City has the world's greatest infrastructure of the year 1920. The people who were ahead of us had the vision to create an extraordinary network of tunnels of all types and all types of items to go through, whether they be railroads, subways, water, electricity, etc. The trouble is that, as all too often happens, especially in the public sector, once something is built and the politician has cut the ribbon, it is very hard to persuade future generations of politicians to be willing to see that it's maintained at a proper level of good operating order, for example. Second part to it is that infrastructure from a politician's perspective rarely pays off during that politician's term of office. Most projects can take as many as 20 years or 30 years to get done. They're not always as extreme as the East Side Rail line, subway line, but they can take a very long time. So that politician may long have been gone by the time the project that he authorized or she authorized and the legislature confirmed was authorized to move forward. Big problem.
Excellent point. On that timetable question, politicians look to the next election, maybe the next couple elections. The rest of us who are going to live here in the long run, we have a longer time frame. And certainly as someone studying sustainability, you're thinking of the long, long run, generations down the line. So what ideas would you want to offer, Nadine, about improvements in our infrastructure?
What I would offer as far as improvements is, I guess, mainly just acceptance. I was agreeing with him when he said, a lot of people, when the politicians get in, they may agree with it, but the person behind them does not agree with it. So I think more people need to be on the same page and understand exactly what's going on with the world and understand exactly how things have changed and how they need to accept the change that's coming along. We need to adapt with the times that is presenting itself. So I think that's pretty much it. We just need to be more acceptance of the things that are coming along and changing. So we all need to get on the same page before, it could be too late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent point. I wonder if you might have a follow-up point about areas where there needs to be more acceptance. Are there sectors of society that are not as aware, not as accepting, to use your term, of the long-range needs of our built environment?
I think so. I think a lot of people just don't want to acknowledge it. They don't really care. There's a lot that goes on here in New York City. We have a lot to worry about. We have to worry about rent. We have to worry about being paid the right amount. And the last thing on their mind is making sure that the community that they live in is clean and sustainable. They're just trying to get by day to day. So I think if we get on the level of individuals, whether it be like just making sure we talk to them in their own language or just explaining to them exactly what the importance is of this sustainable, basically what I'm speaking of is green infrastructure. If we express how this green infrastructure will benefit them, benefit their water quality, benefit their community, and enhance the beautifulness of where they live, then maybe there'll be more acceptance to not throw stuff on the trash on the ground, or be more acceptance of recycling more, or be more acceptance of, just not even taking as many plastic bags from the store. It's just a lot of little things that you can change, and it kind of just boils down to it. Either they don't care, they're too busy worrying about their own lives to care about how their community is affected.
Okay.
Yeah.
This question of how it affects our own lives individually might be a big barrier for a lot of people because infrastructure can be an abstraction or it can be very distant, very large. People think of trains and roads and bridges and all. They don't personally maintain them. They may use them, but they take them for granted. So maybe thoughts about personalizing awareness of infrastructure. George, do you have some thoughts about how people can connect infrastructure to their own lives? What does it do in their everyday life?
One of the issues I've thought a great deal about is when you announce a major capital project, while it may be very good for the common good of a community or of a city or region, it may be terrible for some local residents in a certain area. And we have not solved that problem as a democracy. In Boston, they bought everybody off when they did the big dig. But most people don't have $30 billion to hand out like that when they have a project. So that the real question is, when the very good example close to home is South Brooklyn. You have an antiquated infrastructure, essentially. You have piers that essentially don't really work economically. They're subsidized, a few of them that remain. You have an expressway which was rebuilt as is to try and avoid having to do a major economic impact and physical impact statement. So now it's still totally inadequate. And you have people of color, people who are relatively poor, who unfortunately, because they are on buildings with low ground, were flooded when Hurricane Sandy came through and have not really been dealt with properly or fully. And the problem remains. You still have inadequate ways to reach such folks, and you have tremendous problems for them.
Okay, thank you. Back to Nadine. When different communities are affected by infrastructure projects, there's certainly a lot of disparities in which communities get hit hardest. People who don't have a whole lot of political torque may be the ones who have Bob Moses come blow their neighborhood apart with a highway, as happened in the Bronx. Do you have any thoughts about how different communities can get their voices heard about where the infrastructure goes, how its quality is maintained?
Not really. I'm not necessarily a New York native, so I'm not too familiar of how people have been treated in the past. The only thing I know that came to mind when you were asking me that question is to speak up. You have to be present and let them know, voice your opinion. You know, I was always told where I'm from, closed mouths don't get fed. So if you don't say anything, they're not going to know your issues. And if it's only just one of you, I mean, make noise, say something. Because if you don't say anything, I mean, it's just going to happen regardless. Your opinion doesn't count if you don't speak up. So it's best to speak up. You know, what's it going to hurt? Let your politician or whoever it is that's ahead of your community, your mayor, your governor, whoever, just let them know how you feel. And possibly if you know, connect the right words, they'll understand exactly where you're coming from. Your point will come across. So say something. Just don't let it just go by.
Okay. Well, thanks very much to both of you for speaking up here and making some very constructive noise. I appreciate your help. And let me turn things back over to Stephen.
Okay, thank you both very much for being here. My name is Vanessa Quirk. I'm from New York. I speak very fast, and I apologize in advance for that. First off, I want to try and facilitate conversation between the two of you. So cut me off, jump in if you have thoughts, opinions, or disagree with me. Go ahead. Can we just start off, introduce yourself, what's your name, where are you from?
I'm Jason. I'm from Philadelphia, not the Philippines, though I may look like it. Been there just over a year.
So where'd you grow up?
Sorry?
Where did you grow up then?
I grew up right across the bridge in New Jersey, Cherry Hill.
Okay. And yourself?
I'm from New York. Not originally, but I've lived here 30 years, so I'm a New Yorker.
Okay. Manhattan?
Yeah, 12th Street.
What is the piece of infrastructure that you use most every day, and what drives you crazy about it?
I commute to work. I ride a bike every day. What's really frustrating is that in Philadelphia, the streets are made more for horses than cars. So all the streets are a little tighter, and my biggest fear is getting run over by a car, like getting knocked off and then crushed by that's it. Knock me off, that's fine, but getting crushed is the scary part.
Yeah, I biked here, and it was scary.
Yeah.
It was terrifying. Yeah. And how about you? Do you commute?
I take the subway all the time, all over, and in other boroughs as well. So I know it pretty well now. I would love to bike, but I don't find it. It just doesn't feel safe enough. I would love a real dedicated bike lane, not filled with these maniac bikers like on West Side Highway, where I would feel like safe biking.
Who do you think should pay for infrastructure improvements? Whose responsibility is it to do things like put in bike lanes?
Taxpayers.
Yeah, we should. We're using it. Even if you don't use it particularly, like specifically you use it, I think it's just for the betterment of the community. Why not chip in?
And so where do you think that our taxpayer money should go to first? What is the number one thing that we need to improve infrastructure-wise in our cities?
It's a loaded question. I think the biggest risk right now, at least in my community, is bridges. There was a long period of time where the Turnpike Bridge from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, there was a giant crack in it. And I can see bigger fatalities with that. I think that's something that we need to get ahead of right away because lives are at risk. Not to say that potholes and such aren't life-risking, but bridge collapse is something that grabs headlines and it kills politicians and et cetera.
Anne?
Well, I'm just going to mention my daughter who just got a job for next year teaching at Rutgers. And there is like no way to get there, really. I mean, you have to take Jersey Transit. We've all been reading about what happens there, breaks down every other day. I've never even done this commute, but it sounds like a nightmare. So it seems like that a better way to get from New York City to Rutgers.
Is she Rutgers, New Brunswick?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a pain. Northeast quarter line from Penn Station down. Yeah, that New Jersey Transit just not cool with breakdowns and delays. You can never really count on it being on time.
And the problem with bridges, too, and interstate connections, then, is that you've got two different states, right? Where who is responsible, then, for the budget between them? Do we need to have federal funding for these types of projects? And if so, how do we leverage our influence onto politicians to make that happen?
Well, it's like having a parent, being the federal government, letting two siblings decide who pays for lunch. It's not going to happen. They're going to squabble, and lunch isn't going to get paid for. You're going to end up footing the bill. I'm not a parent, but I am the child in that instance, and I'm fighting with my sibling. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I believe in the federal government paying.
You believe in it?
Yes,
That it should pay, or that it has paid?
that it should pay.
Has
And
it
if you
paid?
look at countries in Europe, you know, they don't even have this argument. It's just like,
Well, why do you think that we've gotten to the place where we all know there's a problem and nothing's being done about it?
Misspending, politicians pandering for votes, promising things that they can't really fulfill, and they get the votes, and then they don't fulfill their promises.
short-term thinking. You know, this bridge isn't going to fall down before I'm up for re-election next, so what do I care?
Scary.
And I think one of the things that people assume that infrastructure is a bipartisan issue, right? Everybody wants better bridges. Everybody wants better trains. But when you get down to like the nitty-gritty, there are a lot of decisions to be made that can fall along political lines,
Sure.
right? Do you
And-
want green infrastructure? Do you want to have more room for development, perhaps, you know?
And I think that as long as one party has a stamp on it, that's automatically 50% opposing it. Gridlock, and it's never going to get nothing's going to get done that way.
I don't know that we're going to disagree about anything.
I know, right? What are you doing afterwards? You
Yeah.
want to get a drink or something? Or?
And what about kind of forward thinking? What about radically changing our cities so that we no longer need cars? Is that the kind of thing? I mean, I know it's like, yeah, we're going to run before we can even walk, but are these the kinds of things that maybe instead of fixing our bridges, we should be thinking about ways to completely radicalize the system?
The thing about radical change, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The thing about radical change is that it's, one, so scary, and two, it's incorporating something that's so close to people's hearts. It's a community. It's kind of like a child. That's kind of why education hasn't gone anywhere, because super big change when it comes to our kids is scary. I don't want that. It worked for me. It's going to work for them. I think same thing. It's the same thing with infrastructure. Anything radically different is scary, and people are automatically going to oppose that.
Well, I follow an organization called the Project for Public Spaces, which does something called placemaking, and they're actually responsible for many of the nicer things we have in our city, the places where there are chairs and benches and greenery and so on. And they do this all over the world, and I'm for very radical changes of the cities.
So, but you consider that radical, just greening, or?
Well, the fact that it's happened here makes me see, I mean, under Mayor Bloomberg, that how much is really possible when people don't have to put their name on something or get the credit for it. And one of the things that PPS does, they have an initiative called Lighter, Faster, Cheaper. So it doesn't have to be these huge infrastructure projects. Just put out a few chairs where people want to sit.
But is that enough, I guess, is my question. I think it's necessary. It's because we've been talking about the fact that nothing gets done, right? And so you can feel very powerless. So these are the kinds of things that we can do to take back power and take back our spaces. But what about things like, I don't know, did you see Elon Musk's plan to have driverless cars on highways?
And
I mean,
the
where
solar roadways. I think
Right.
any of these big things are going to have to be privately funded or crowdsourced, which is kind of the way just our culture is going now. Everything that is like crowdsourced or GoFundMe, they get a lot of traction, and they've funded a crazy amount of different things.
I mean, that's an interesting proposition. Should we crowdsource our highways? You know what I mean? Because is there no sense of civic responsibility anymore?
I totally wish that we didn't have to do that, but I don't see any politicians having the gusto to just go out and propose something super crazy different. That different doesn't always get you votes, and that's not going to always get. You're not going to get change that way.
I mean, the last big, I think, infrastructure kind of national initiative was during the WPA in the 1930s, where people were put to work as work relief, and they built all these beautiful bridges that we're still using, and painted murals and did all kinds of things. But I don't see any kind of thinking like that now.
It's a little nihilistic, guys.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right. Well, we have about a minute to wrap up, so maybe just to finish, one improvement you'd like to see in your city.
How about I go? We have a lot of empty malls across America. I think it'd be really cool to retrofit them and convert them into new cool community centers or things that the community can take a part of, because I think the statistic was 150,000 malls were built in like the 90s, and only 100,000 of them are still working. So that's like 50,000 empty giant buildings of shopping graveyards. That could be something, I don't know.
Definitely.
Okay, I have two quick things. One is fix the elevator in the subway so they're not
Yes.
so horrible and smelly.
And for people in wheelchairs, it is a
wheelchairs
shame
and
that
mothers
we
with
haven't-
baby carriages and so on. The second thing is to limit all memorials to benches that people can sit on.
Beautiful.
Artists can design them, that's fine, as long as you can sit on them.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you both for
Thank you.
chatting with me.
Yeah.
I'm Bill Millard for Van Allen, and can we get both your names?
Check. I am Mr. Lix from Dominica.
From Dominica. Okay.
Yeah.
And might let that siren pass a bit here. Well, maybe that's not going to be going fast enough. Just try to holler
Infrastructure's
over
going
it.
down.
Sorry?
Infrastructure's going down.
Yeah, there must be something.
Definitely.
Here, there's a big building collapsing about 55th, and no, maybe not.
Oh, maybe not.
Not that building. Could we get your name and describe where you're from and what you do?
Thomas Stacy, and from Savannah, Georgia, and I'm in IT.
You're in IT.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of discussion about roads and bridges and physical infrastructure, but information infrastructure, as you work with, is another. Boy, I'm really going to have to holler over that. Our information infrastructure arguably is at least as important as our transportation infrastructure in keeping modern civilization moving. What are your thoughts about the information component of infrastructure? And we recently saw an enormous exposure of the vulnerability of our information infrastructure when that ransomware got around, knocked out the British National Health Service. Our information infrastructure is enormously vulnerable. Is that the area you work in? Do you keep our information infrastructure running or safe?
Well, I was in IT sales, so
IT
I
sales,
certainly
okay.
could sell you something to keep it safe. Hearing the conversation about infrastructure, and of course, what comes to my mind immediately was IT and how is data being processed, input, output, and then, well, before my IT background, I was in the military. So through the military and going into IT, number one priority of work has always been for me security. Mm-hmm. So when talking about infrastructure and talking about IT, I've always looked at it security first. And what just went on with WannaCry, the ransomware affecting 70,000 plus devices over a 2-week period, yes, it's security. And that's what comes in my mind in infrastructure. And I think the public has to be a little bit more aware of what information is being put out in a public matter. I think everybody, this is the age of the selfie and tagging I'm in a restaurant, I'm here. But if you're putting that information out there, there are eyes seeing that information, and more importantly, they're seeing where you're not.
They're seeing where you're not?
Where you're not.
Okay.
Where you're not. You're not at home. You're not with your children. You're not with valuables. You're not with anything that could be confiscated. Anything could be taken advantage of.
Okay. Now, without revealing any national military secrets, what is the military doing to try to keep its own infrastructure robust that we can know about? This is an area we haven't explored, the contributions of the military to our society. It's something that doesn't get enough attention in a lot of quarters. You've got some unique expertise to draw on here.
I would not consider this unique expertise by any means, but through recent articles that I have just looking over it, the United States government certainly is going to revamp their cybersecurity defense. As much as people might not like what's going on in the White House right now, but one of the main things that seems to be working on is cyber defense. That he wants to look at the guidelines that were drawn on in 2005 by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and ultimately says why these guidelines were given out, but they haven't been executed on. So to go back to these guidelines, to go with, I think he's meeting with, 30-something original equipment manufacturers and their CEOs, and says, what do we need to do to become more secure? These guidelines were in place back in 2005. How come these objectives were not hit? They're not met and maintained. So certainly there was a discussion earlier about infrastructure of a bridge project. Politicians want the vote, the big project, but once that they've got the vote, the maintenance part of it is kind of out the window.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same boat of what NIST came along in 2005 and said, hey, this is your security playbook. This is what's going to keep you safe. And I think a lot of people are looking back right now and says, why were we not executing long ago?
I think
I think this theme that we largely know what needs doing. We just have trouble getting the national funding, getting the politicians to agree on it. This seems to be a recurring theme here. Now, I wonder if your perspective coming from Dominica might offer any useful stories about how the national government can respond to these things. I know Dominica has done much better than its neighbor Haiti in some ways in reacting to
Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic, yes.
Not Dominican Republic.
Oh,
Dominica.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Different place then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, where you come from? What do you see being done in your home area to react on the national level or the local level?
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with information and information being deciphered, because there's a lot of information going out there, and you would like to give people the right set of information so that they can be informed to make the right decisions. Because if you have a jumble up of a number of information, the wrong and right, people make judgments on the wrong information, and therefore you're going to have the wrong output coming out from that. And I don't think that's a very good thing. So for us to be able to move forward in the right direction, whether it be in the United States, in the Caribbean, wherever, you need the right information being distributed to the right set of people, and of course, you making the decisions on that basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see the infrastructure affecting our natural environment? How do you see the relation between what we build and what we already have from the earth?
Well,
what's the impact on our physical environment there?
Well, that is a good question. I think it should be balanced. When you have a lot of infrastructure, I think you also need to have the natural components where you have a lot of trees, to give oxygen, and keep the city going with that life form. But then you'll also need to think of, what can take place when it comes to jobs to offer people, and, that whole thinking aspect of it. So I think it should be balanced when it comes down to that aspect there.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There needs to be a balance. Just before the conversation was radical change, radical ideas. Right now, sustainable, renewable energy resources.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
Say the market switches like that with renewables, sustainable projects, whatever, driverless cars. Well, you've just taken the number one employer of the United States out the window, is driving. Number one employer of the United States is driving. It's a driving occupancy, whether it's logistics, taxis, bus schools, whatever. From point A to point B, those jobs are gone. Renewable resources, you've taken away so much of what the infrastructure is based on right now. Those jobs are out the window. So go ahead.
And can they be replaced by other jobs that are based in the renewable sectors?
Okay, so
because arguably the fossil fuel-driven economy is the most subsidized thing and the most unaccountable component of our economy.
Right, and you go to economics on that. Elon Musk, who I think is a hero, I love his ideas. He wants to make the world a better place, in my opinion, in my readings. He's got the solar panel idea, the driverless car idea, which is going to combat that that driving occupation. Well, he brings the idea of, we have a zero emissions car that's going to protect the planet. It's going to be more green thumb. Well, studies are coming out right now and reports that it's releasing zero emissions, but everything to construct that car up into that point where the keys are given to the driver has actually done more pollution I think it's up to a 5% less pollution rate for someone driving a car.
Yeah.
So it's economics at that standpoint, because it's great, it's green when you have when you're given the keys, but to get that car, the lithium construction, the lithium harvesting out the earth, it's done more damage than a regular Ford coming off the market running on basically gasoline. So there has to be
some form of
there has to be
recycling,
new
maybe?
sciences. There
Yeah.
has to be new ways. Anything radical is going to cause a little bit more chaos, I believe, in the beginning. I'm all for finding a renewable source because we only got one Earth, and that Earth is going to be here regardless we're not. So I think we're damaging our Earth more.
And to interject on that, it's not also utilizing what the earth has, but putting back into the earth as
Yes.
well. Because we tend to take out a lot from the earth and forget about putting back into the earth. And that also depletes our ozone layer, destroys us as humans living on this earth. And I think we need to take that into consideration as well, putting back into the earth. Yeah.
Certainly. Now, Buckminster Fuller would tell you that something is putting back into the earth on a daily basis much more energy than we really know how to make use of, and that's the sun. We have so much more solar energy reaching us than we can efficiently convert. Now, I wonder if you have any examples of ways that solar and other renewables can be more efficient, that we can have infrastructure that does less damage, that increases that input-output balance as we face our earth.
Well, like you mentioned, solar. Solar, I think, is it's everywhere. You might not have water everywhere, but you definitely have solar power everywhere. So if you can put this in the buildings and replace that from actually using fuels, because there are a lot of, that's one of the things that, especially in the eastern side of the world, that's one of the things that's coming up, solar and wind power. So, I mean, New York pretty much has all of them. So I think it's more utilizing that aspect, putting that in there, and going away from what we take from the earth. The sun is from space, so we take it from space and utilizing it on earth.
Can I?
Sure.
All right, so solar power. This is for everybody here who can vote. It's the people that's going to make a change on solar power.
Yeah.
Politicians, we were just talking earlier, well, why hasn't there been change? Well, because of lobbying for the big companies, whether it's oil, steel, anything that's anti-solar power is why we're not seeing it.
And ignorance as well.
Ignorance as well, but it's more about the money. If you got a big lobbyist coming in that's going to push solar power and it's going to feed the pockets of some politician that's going to push the movement, then we're going to see more solar power. That's just how it is.
So
there's plenty of cases right now. Akon, a rapper, who has housed, I think it's something about 35 million people in Africa on solar power. So you're saying that a third world country of undeveloped of what Africa is that can't benefit from those same technologies here in the United States in New York City? Well, why is that not happening? Well, it's because of politics, and it's because of big companies that are coming in, and they're just feeding it.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, is ignorance. The people don't know. Some of the policies that are passing, people don't know what's taking place. So it just goes under the carpet and it happens.
And people here have a choice. I just learned this with Con Edison, that you can make a switch to where you're getting your powers or your electricity or your renewables from more green or a greenlier path. I forget the name of it, but I think it's called Green Mountain. You can change that. You can go into Con Edison and say, I would like to go into Green Mountain and get my renewables from Green Mountain.
That's one of many Con Ed offers, I believe.
Point fact, and I think a lot of people just don't know about that. As soon as I learned about that, I was like, well, let me backtrack. It's like, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but to me, that's worth it. Worth it knowing that, hey, I'm doing a part, my recycling, I'm using green, I'm being green when I can. I'm going to switch to Con Edison.
Okay, so it's the economics and the information. Can we look at those forms of soft infrastructure, our information infrastructure, our network of information that we inhabit, the information that passes through market mechanisms, as you were mentioning? Can we look at those as amenable to some kind of structural reform?
Certainly. That's a huge issue right now with internet service providers. Who's going to control the traffic on the internet service provider? Basically, who's controlling the ones and zeros that are Is it public domain, or does it belong to the owner of that infrastructure? That's a big gamble there. But what can be, I think what can be done is that internet service provider can put out the information and, hey, this is crossing our infrastructure, but it's yours. Something has to be remedied there. But
As when they redefined the net as a public utility for regulatory
exactly.
purposes?
Yes. I mean, as a consumer, I have to be cognizant that I'm putting information out there that's on someone else's infrastructure. It's going out to someone's server. It's being collected to someone else's server or piggyback. So I need to be aware of the information that that I'm putting out there. I need to be conspicuous.
And where it's
really.
going as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you both. I wish we had many, many more minutes because you're both really on a roll with some good information here. But it's time that I handed this back over to Stephen.
Happy belated Mother's Day to all those
Take care,
mothers out
guys.
there.
All right, welcome both. Thank you both for participating in Crossroads Conversations. My name is Vanessa Quirk, in case you weren't here 10 minutes ago. I work for a magazine. I speak very fast. Those are the, the salient details. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Tell me where you're from and why you're in Times Square today.
I'm from Canada. My name is Luck Merville. And I'm in Times Square because I'm revisiting New York. To me, it's been a while, and I sat there just to feel the vibe, just to feel the people, and I'm feeling great about this place. There's an energy here, and it tells me that the world is changing very fast, and I see a lot of changes in New York, and as you were talking about infrastructure, I thought I should go out there and say what I think about it.
And where are you from exactly in Canada?
Montreal.
Going there later. Okay, excellent. What about you, Annika?
I'm from New York, I think. I've been here 2 years. I graduate from NYU in
Congratulations.
tomorrow.
Oh, super
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Thank you
Yay.
very much.
And what do you graduate in?
Public health with a focus on food.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'm in Times Square because I'm from here, so it's one of my least favorite places. But my parents are visiting, so I have to be in Times Square. I'm only here because I have to be here.
I think most New Yorkers, we avoid Times Square.
I've
if we
been
can.
here 2 years, I've been here once.
So I'm really interested that you studied public health and food. So there is a huge component of that in infrastructure, right?
yeah.
So I don't think many people know this, but when Hurricane Sandy happened here a few years ago, if Hurricane Sandy had hit an hour earlier when the tides had been higher, a place called Hunts Point Distribution Center would have flooded. That's in the Bronx. That's where a huge portion of New York City's food is distributed every day. So if you can imagine the fact that if our bridges collapsed or if the tunnels flood, you cannot get food into this city, right? These are things that we need to address. We should have addressed yesterday, right? So when you're thinking about food safety and the fact that we need to have nutritious food coming into our cities, how do you think about the ways that infrastructure needs to be prepared for that?
Okay, so I'm going to talk based on like my minimal experience in public health. So we were recently doing a project and we studied the area of Dumbo and compared it to the neighboring neighborhood of Farragut, which is now called the Forgotten Farragut, because when they designed it, literally the area that ends at Dumbo, it's the adjoining area, which is Farragut, and the median income there is about $20,000 a year, and in Dumbo it's about $200,000. So access to food, quality of food, the differences are just stark. So even people living in Farragut are all in public housing, so they're already on either Medicare or Medicaid. The closest bus, I think, is about a mile away. So if you're already old enough that you can walk to a bus, so it's also about what kind of food you're going to buy, because nobody's going to go to travel 2 miles to buy fresh produce that's only going to last about 4 days. So you end up eating badly. Obesity rates are higher. Diabetes is higher. So it's basically about infrastructure. So of course there's politics and policy involved. So if there's the big companies, we grow our food differently now. We were just reading about food insecurity and about how it's so much easier to solve food insecurity in a country like somewhere in like Northern Africa, because they still have the opportunity to grow their food in smaller farms. But here, all of these large corporations have just bundled together multiple smaller farms, and the way they treat their soil is so different that there's no biodiversity, so you can't even grow better food now. All you can grow is corn and wheat and soy. So just food and as the gentleman right before me was saying, because politics is involved, there are so many things you can't change in this country.
Yes, but then again, politics will always be involved.
That's true.
And I asked the gentleman, I don't remember your name, but the first thing you did today was asking people, what is infrastructure? And sometimes we tend to diminish it to just saying, oh, infrastructure is a series of ways to build the underneath, the ecosystem that's underneath the structure, that supports the structure. But it's vast. Infrastructure is vast. And this is one of the reasons why you cannot put politics out of it.
Yeah.
Because let's say, for instance, the infrastructure of your country, of America, somehow is your constitution.
Yeah.
And the way that constitution is written is this infrastructure that will support law, will support your cities, will support the way you govern all this, and you decide on what you're going to do about your infrastructure. Now, if you want that to be done, you need people to understand this.
Yeah.
You need people to get involved. You need people to know what is infrastructure in order to be sure and to understand that a bridge is very important. A bridge is not just a thing that's connecting two islands. It's not just cars going through. It's food.
Yeah.
It's energy. It's people. It's people that can ride a bicycle instead of taking a car. It's ever-changing. It's evolving. It's living. So, it's all interconnected. And to me, this is what infrastructure is. And in order to understand about the food coming in and going out, because a city without food coming in and out for 2 to 10 million people, if you can't have that happening, it's impossible. People will die.
Yeah, I mean, but then also there's a lot of food. I mean, I just have a million ideas right now. But the same way, when you talk about, say, in Manhattan, there's so much food waste. So how do you even integrate that with infrastructure? How do you, so with food banks, there are so many in Bed-Stuy, which is supposedly a food desert. But people don't know because they just, one, they don't have access, and two, it's not even communicated to them. So many multiple churches and other religious organizations have community centers and food banks that provide free food, whether it's cooked or raw or whatever. And one, there's a stigma, but that's a separate whole situation. But even just with access, they're all online, but do they know that it's available? I went to a library to find out if they had anything in the area because I wasn't from there, and even they had no idea. And there were brochures saying, oh, so we have a cooking class, and we have this and we have that, and people working in the library don't know. So why would you expect somebody to come in and be like,
So,
oh, do you have
as
this?
I was saying, it's an ecosystem.
It is.
Information is also infrastructure. Getting people to know what they have to know in order to know where to go to get what they need is also, it's all about the infrastructure.
Yeah.
We need to rethink, I think, that we need to rethink our infrastructures because we are more and more people living in cities. The buildings are getting taller, more people are coming in. We need to rethink because these cities, they were not built for that many people. So if we don't rethink the infrastructures, it's not going to be viable on the long run.
But whose responsibility is it to keep people informed? Do we have to inform ourselves? Is that every individual person's individual responsibility? Should it be the government that somehow trickles down into the people? How you're saying that the basis is that we need to be informed in order to support this ecosystem, but who's going to do the informing, or how do we ourselves remain informed, especially when today you have so much information coming at you from all sides?
The first word that comes to mind here is education. It's education. I mean, if kids, I'm from Montreal, I'm an artist. I'm not an engineer or anything, but I'm educated in a way in Canada where I was taught not to litter, not to throw things just on the floor. I was taught to, okay, if I'm buying things, I'm going to buy it in a store where I know I'm not going to pay. I'm buying something that is going to last. It's going to last long. I'm going to make sure that what I'm wearing, this has been here for 10 years. This has been here for another 15 years,
But
and I
that's-
might leave it for my kids. So it's all also, it's about, this is all about infrastructure still. Education, to me, is part of that. If you want people to inform themselves, they can, but they need to be educated. They need to understand, and they need to learn not to believe everything they read, everything they hear, and I'm sure you don't, because you're educated in a way where you question. You question, where is that information from? Is that journalist, is he a real journalist? Where's the source coming from? It's important. Most people don't ask these questions. They don't ask them because they were not taught to ask these questions. Education, to me, is the basic infrastructure for every human being on this planet.
Okay, I agree with you. I think education is one of the main areas we're lacking because there isn't a certain curiosity. With food especially, people don't know where their food is coming from. People almost don't care where their food is coming from, and that baffles me because if you don't know where your food is being grown
You don't
and
care
in
about
what
your health.
conditions, you don't care about your health.
But-
And sorry, but I forgot what I was saying. Never mind.
But for me, both of these things are coming back to the same root question, though.
Yeah, the government.
Right.
Sorry,
the government,
that's what I was
right?
saying. I think the government should pay for it.
Right.
Because one,
Who is the government?
the government through your taxpayer
We are the
dollars, though.
government.
Yeah, but
We decide.
that's the-
We vote for them. And if we let them do whatever they want, they will. We have to be aware. We have to look out to them and go to them. We are the one that has to tell them what to do.
Unless your system is structured that you have an electoral committee. Sorry.
What, sorry?
Unless your system is structured that you.
But that you can, right?
That-
That you're
well,
disenfranchised, essentially,
yes.
by the way that the system is set up, right? I mean, the person on the other panel earlier suggested that maybe we shouldn't even bother with public funding for infrastructure. Maybe we should just go the privatized route, right? Is that a solution?
What incentive do they
dangerous.
have, though? What incentive? Like when you say privatized, is it us or is it private companies? That
Let's say
private
you were talking
companies.
about waste before. Should waste be a problem that a private company takes on and tries to monetize?
It's too expensive for them. It's too. So I was. So City Harvest has a food wastage campaign, and they get restaurants involved, and they donate their food and everything. And the main reason restaurants don't get involved is because even it just doesn't work logistically for them. Packaging is too expensive. Transportation is too expensive. It just doesn't make any sense. So unless there's either a tax break, the government provides like a tax break or anything of that sort, there is just no incentive.
Yeah, but it cannot be just economical.
I know, but
It has to
if
be
you're
better
running a
than that.
company at the end of the
We
day,
have to be better than that.
I
We
mean,
have
I
to think
wish it
about
were that
humans
way.
first, I think.
I study public health. I wish it were that way, but I just unless there's an incentive. So one of my professors keeps saying it doesn't matter if somebody else gets rich as long as we're developing the same way.
Okay.
So if
what do you think should be done for it to be that way?
Ideally,
You said you wish it would be
ideally, I
that
wish
way.
there were
What-
maybe for food wastage especially. I think one the government would have more programs to just either find people or provide tax breaks to restaurants. So many large restaurants can. There's so much food to be donated. There is so much food that doesn't have to be wasted.
What can we do
With
as a people to get these governments, to get these people to do this?
In grocery stores, just because produce is not perfect, it doesn't mean it's of lower nutritional value, but they throw them away because it just doesn't move. So again, it comes back to education and being informed, but it also comes back to the government allowing companies like this, or giving them opportunities to be more, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think we have to wrap up because we're right
Okay.
on our 10 minutes. But one piece of infrastructure that you've enjoyed in your stay in New York?
The transport system.
The subway?
Yeah, the subway it's cleaner. It's far cleaner than
What?
it used to be. It used to be far worse than that. It used to be very smelly.
Okay,
It
small
smells better.
signs of progress.
It's
And
better. It's
favorite
way
piece
better.
of infrastructure in New York City?
Oh, the subway for sure.
You love the subway.
I love the subway. You can
Wow,
get
guys.
anywhere with the subway.
Votes for
I
the
wish,
subway.
That's it.
I wish it was
Less
easier to get from
cars.
the east to the west.
Yeah.
But definitely. But that's also because I've only been to a couple other places in America, and there's no way you can go by subway. You have to drive everywhere. I don't know how to drive.
And you have
Right.
bicycles also now.
Yeah,
I see we
that's
can
true.
rent bicycles. You should do the same thing with smaller electrical cars.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys both so much.
pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It was lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Is this my water?
All right, thanks so much to everyone who participated. If you kind of joined at the end, this is Crossroads Conversations. It's an initiative by Van Alen Institute. We're a nonprofit looking at design and how our environments impact us and vice versa. You can learn more on vanallen.org. We're currently in the middle of a really fun events festival that's going through Thursday. So sign up for those events, and we hope to see you all over the city in the next few days. We're also so thankful to partner with Times Square Alliance on this series. This is a 5-part series that's been so fascinating to look at topics like infrastructure, immigration, healthcare, gender, and sexuality. And so if you want to watch the videos of past ones, they're also on our website. And I'm also so thankful to Cooper Union and Guido for helping put together a really interesting set of questions. And yeah, let's have a round of applause for our moderators and all the participants tonight.